Hello, I'm Simon Fairfax and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to deal with the second video, and this week for my medieval series, A Knight and a Spy, and this week we're going to look at Worcester, just outside Edgar Tower, where, if you've read 1410, and I'm not going to ruin it for you, but Jamie, Cristoforo and Mark end up in Worcester on their way to Wales. That's all I'm going to say in case you haven't read the book. And they come to Worcester on their journey through. Now at that time, it's quite interesting that Wales actually started literally just on the other side of the River Severn. But here we're in front of Edgar Tower, which would have then at that stage, and it's very sad, led to the castle in College Green. The castle's no longer there. Sadly, it fell into disrepair in the English Civil War and was demolished. However, this brings me to research and how it affects the plotting of a novel. Now, research amongst historical writers is quite contentious. Some would say you read loads and loads and then you get rid of 90% and only use 10. But for me and for my novels, because they're set in the events of one calendar year, research actually leads the book, so much so that when I write other novels without all the research and the events that have gone on in that year, I actually feel a little bit adrift. I'm not really quite sure what's going on. So the research dictates the pattern of the story, because my books are all about real history, about what happened. But then when history stops, my characters and my story begins. So here we are, just inside the city walls, underneath Edgar Tower, which Jamie, Mark and Cristoforo would have travelled when they stayed the night in Worcester Castle. Now, it's very sad the castle is not here, as I say, because it was a traditional Motte and Bailey castle on a mound, a man-made mound in this College Green, right in front of Worcester Cathedral, which we'll see in a moment. And then at the back of the green there, you'll see where the black and white building is with the lovely chimneys coming up. Those steps there lead directly down to the river. And just the other side, there's a bridge much further up, not the original one, is where Wales literally started. So here we are now, the sun's coming directly into my eyes, so you have to excuse me while I put my sunglasses on, that's better. So we're now directly in front of the cathedral. So much history going on here, which I'm not even going to try and discuss today. But as I said, research dictates my books. Now, if you keep putting lots and lots of information in, like a lot of people say, and there's the classic show don't tell, show don't tell. But in my case, the research has to feed in and has to dictate the events. Part of that research, and here's a slight bone of contention for some of my readers, but I do warn everybody at the front, because I didn't want my books to sound like SAS men dressed up in armour and waving swords around rather than Heckler and Koch machine guns, I decided to use only language in direct speech. And I do stress indirect speech here. The stories still flow in modern language, but indirect speech, only those words that were used at that time within the medieval period, or at least 16th century. Now, sometimes this can cause a problem, and some of my plaudits turn around and say they hate it because of it. But I do warn everyone at the start that this is the case. Now, it's not Chaucer, certainly not, and it's not Shakespeare, but also the sentence structure is completely different. I think it adds authenticity to the book, because you're not getting modern idioms and patterns of speech, which you may do elsewhere. Again, another reason why I, as a writer, wanted to write the books the way I wanted to write them. For me, it gives the individual heroes a depth. And on authenticity and research, I find so many wonderful characters, not least of which was Richard Whittington. Now, this is the guy that went down to London with his sack of gold to find the streets paved with gold. This is the story of the pantomime. The real Dick Whittington was far from a pauper arriving in London. He came from a rich merchant family based in Hereford and went down to London, was Lord Mayor 3 times. He was also, I found, one of the king's spy masters. At that time, merchants were used by people to gain information. And what better person to travel around than meet people perfectly innocently, gain information, report back. And it's him that recruits James de Grisper, who becomes Sir Jamie de Grisper. He was a fascinating character and acts as M was for James Bond in The Spies and the books, because he then is the puppeteer, the marionette that pulls everything together. And he's the one of the fabulous characters that actually gets my books going and orchestrates the plots as they go. Right, here we are at the River Severn. And this is the new bridge, which came along a lot later than Jamie's time. At that point, the white buildings in the background show the site of the original bridge. And that boundary, that barrier there, was the main gateway to Wales. It's where, now at that time, the Welsh were not allowed to enter England without a permit, and they couldn't work here. It was a completely different world. And I don't want to overload everyone with research, but you've just got to understand the different mentality of the medieval times. And that hopefully is what I get across into my novels, where they're still fun, full of action, but at the same time they adhere to the events of what was going on and the attitudes of the people at that time.